Hello, friends, and welcome back. Here at To Witch Isle, we talk about spirituality and mental health and how they work together. I'm Charmaine,
And I'm Krystle.
and today we are going to discuss trauma.
Ooh.
Woo! Okay, so let's dive right in. I asked a few people what they thought trauma was. And based on all of the answers that I got, some were very simple, some were a little bit more elaborate, but basically, everybody thinks it's something negative that happens to you that changes your behavior or your patterns of life or shakes your belief to the core. People believe that trauma is more or less something that is long term, when trauma doesn't necessarily have to be long term for everybody because it's based highly on perception, individual perception. Our perception show and our ego show really go with this show. Um, so I'm going to let you go ahead and turn it over to you, Krystle. What are your feelings on trauma?
Well, I feel that trauma takes place in a multitude of different ways. I think that trauma is, it's global. It's not just events that happen to a person, but it's the experiences that anybody could have, groups of people. For example, there are collective traumas, like global collective trauma, like the coronavirus, the lockdown that's happening. That is a collective global trauma. World War One and World War II were collective global traumas. We have regional trauma, which is war, like what's happening in Ukraine, 9/11, the wars in the Middle East. And regional also encompasses like natural disasters, like the wildfires in California. Here in Oklahoma, we experience a lot of tornadoes. The East Coast experiences a lot of hurricanes. We have flooding, earthquakes, things like that. There's ancestral trauma. That is burning of witches. That was, the Vikings being persecuted because they were not Christian. There's generational trauma, things that happen to us, as generations, like Vietnam, the war in Vietnam. That here in the United States, we had the 60s and we had, the protests, and then that was a generational trauma there for them. There's cultural traumas. The indigenous peoples of America, they have a cultural trauma because they were removed from their homes and they were slaughtered for unnecessary reasons, just because, the white people thought that they were unclean and they were whatever. There's racial trauma, slavery, racism, religious trauma, being persecuted religiously, even, like you've had experiences with the religious trauma. There's also family trauma, toxic family system. So it's not just things that happen to you personally. It is things that trauma is something that can happen to everyone on a massive scale. And we don't really think about those things so much as traumas because of everyone. It's so me. We don't think about, well, it's everywhere.
Right. Well, let me go ahead and offer the Google definition of trauma. It's a deeply distressing or disturbing experience or physical injury. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. All of those things that may happen specifically to you. But just like you said, there are a multitude of other traumas. There are people that experienced trauma from seeing the World Trade Center fall. That in itself was a huge trauma to the people of New York, but not just the people of New York, the whole country, because we came together at that time. So traumas, like you said, they can be a multitude of things. In the definitions that people gave me, I asked them what they thought trauma was. And here's some of the answers I got. being bullied as a kid, feeling left out, both as a child or an adult, having an emotionally unstable boss or a person in your life that you have to deal with daily. The news is a big trauma as well. If you watch the news religiously and you're just soaking in the negativity that the news is putting out, you in turn are surrounding yourself in negative. Therefore, you're going to yourself become negative.
Yeah, you buy the
Um,
experience of the news by paying attention to it.
mhm. Now, there's also a best friend or a loved one lying to you or betraying you, assaults, witnessing death. It all comes down to perception, what a trauma is to you or what actually does affect you and traumatize you.
Right,
So,
absolutely. Because just because, two people have experienced the same event does not mean that they necessarily view it in the same scope trauma-wise.
mhm,
One thing that affects you may not affect me the same way, and vice versa. I mean, it's one person's not so bad as another person's living hell. So,
mhm.
it's all based on that perspective that we talked about before too.
Yep. Now trauma itself is an event, like I said, but what was being described to me was more like PTSD.
Mhm.
Often that you hear trauma and PTSD used together. However, they are kind of separate, and not everybody who experiences a trauma will end up with PTSD. It is based on their personal experience in life as to how they handle the trauma that happens to them. Some people happen to be super healthy in life and they deal with their traumas pretty pretty well, and they figure out their emotions and they're okay. They move on. But some of us develop the PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, and that happens to get us stuck.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and then that brings me to, like, talking about getting stuck. Well, trauma does get stuck. It majorly gets stuck in your nervous system and your somatic response, your fight, flight, and freeze, fawn. All of that comes down to your trauma response and how you have experienced trauma as children, how we were, how we experienced trauma, and whether we were allowed to express ourselves adequately depends on how that trauma is trapped inside of our body. And our somatic nervous system is, is triggered by trauma. So you can experience something once and then your body has a memory. So if you have an experience that triggers that nervous system response again, your body automatically goes into trauma mode. It goes into an anxiety attack. It goes into explosive anger. I mean, everyone has different ways of reacting, whenever they're experiencing trauma. Some people just completely shut down and just can't, function at all. They have to, walk out of the room, or, like, maybe they'll just sit there and cover their ears, just depending on. But yeah, absolutely, that it's trapped into our body. And yeah.
That's exactly what happens. Our body, there's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. Um, I was trying to remember the individual who wrote the book, and I can't. So, but that book really describes how repeated traumas or PTSD really allows your body to metabolize that response and then hold it for years and years and years until you physically release that response from your body. And that is very much a big part of what post traumatic growth is. Let's back up just a little bit and we'll go over the three types of
Oh yeah,
trauma that there are
absolutely.
out there. There's three top types. There's acute trauma, which is typically a single event. That's like my grandfather died. That a death in the family. It could be a divorce. It could be um, I went to school and I made an art project and it got laughed at when I didn't, when I felt like it was really good. Those are like single individual
Car
traumatic
wreck.
events. Car wreck is another one. There's also chronic trauma, which is repeated and prolonged, and that is like domestic abuse or sexual abuse if it has been long term. Um, that's like I'm trapped in a marriage and my partner expects me to do this for them, but I don't feel like I want to. That type of trauma. Then there's complex trauma, and that is an exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often invasive and interpersonal in nature, and they usually start in childhood. This is kind of where I qualify for trauma. I had I am a survivor of sexual abuse as a child. But I also survived it as a young adult as well. So it is a huge part of what I have had to deal with because I, in turn, did develop PTSD because I was at the time of childhood not able to express my emotions in the proper way because it was frowned upon. I was told I wasn't allowed to. There were a lot of places where I didn't feel I was allowed to express what I needed to express. Therefore, I bottled it all up. I brushed it under the rug like my whole family wanted me to do, and I kept quiet about it until I didn't. And it wasn't until I didn't that I didn't get better. That's when I started getting better. So those are the three types of trauma that are out there. Now, there's many, many things that qualify like that qualify as trauma, as Krystle mentioned, the collective traumas, the intergenerational traumas, all of those traumas are all part of this little system here.
Right. So like I have some childhood traumas that are would be considered, more along the complex line. Um like if you were an abused child, like you got hit on a regular basis. Um Parents being completely emotionally unavailable. Um like being mentally and verbally abused on a regular basis. Also, your parents being divorced can even do that to you, be a lifelong trauma for you. Um, the not being provided safety, not having food, not having shelter, not having, clothing and shoes that fit, things like that. Complete abandonment, even, um, just humiliation, things like that. Those are all childhood traumas that
Hmm.
you learn how to process then. And if you are experiencing all of any number of those things during childhood, it completely distorts your perception of reality and how you process, just daily things that happen, like I was saying, one person's hell is another person's not so bad. Well, it depends on, how we were responded to as children, like what we experienced. So that brings you into like, how do you work with that? How do you go
Child,
into
right.
that?
Childhood bonds, your bond with your parent will determine a lot about your perspective throughout life. If your bond with your mother didn't have an emotional element, maybe your mom wasn't very emotional. My mother was pretty emotional. So I had an emotional bond with my mother. But the bond that I formed with my mother became a little toxic because I, as a child, saw what the trauma was doing to my mother, and in turn thought I needed to fix that. So by fixing that, which meant by putting myself to the side and doing everything I could to make my mother comfortable, it taught me that I was secondary. I'm a secondary person. Now I go above and beyond to please other people, which is that whole fawn element, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fawn is people pleasing to the extreme. I have done a lot of people pleasing over the course of my life because of the way my bonds developed with my parental units during childhood. And most people don't realize that some of those things become very traumatic throughout the rest of life. If you've learned to put yourself secondary, then your perspective on yourself has been damaged. And that's what leads to those cognitive distortions that we talked about in previous episodes.
Yeah,
That's where these cognitive distortions come in.
and I think that you just made a or I had an epiphany moment here while you were talking, and it's a another form of trauma that we do to ourselves on a daily basis is not holding up our own boundaries. Whenever you break your own boundary, you are traumatizing yourself. Just, people pleasing.
Yep.
That's a boundary that you should have set in place. And whenever you do the people pleasing, you are traumatizing yourself by not withholding that boundary up.
You're right. You're right. And that's that is so important to have boundaries around yourself, because if you don't, that's when you start feeling worthless. That's when you start feeling hopeless. That's when these PTSD symptoms can really hurt you. So I want to go in real quick on what your brain is doing. What your brain is supposed to do, and what your brain does when trauma happens and we get stuck. So our prefrontal cortex allows us to think and plan and make decisions. It's that thinking part of our brain in the front, the part that goes dark in The Walking Dead when all the zombies come back. That's that part. The amygdala is what activates our alarm system, our fight or flight, and it processes our emotional memories. The hippocampus processes your life experiences and converts them to long term memory. And our cerebellum is what regulates our motor control and puts us into action when our alarm system goes off. So that's how a normal, healthy brain would be acting.
Right.
What,
And you've
what,
even said that trauma deadens and kills parts of the brain. So,
yes. So in trauma, especially post traumatic stress disorder, what happens is we've gotten stuck. And why we've gotten stuck is because part of our prefrontal cortex, due to the trauma, starts to shrink. So the part that makes sense in our brain of what's going on, that front portion, it starts to shrink, and we can't make sense of our negative emotions that occur with specific stimuli, the stimuli that remind us of the trauma. So, what happens is the activity in our amygdala spikes and it increases, which means that your negative emotions are setting off the alarm system, fight or flight, more than it should now because it has increased activity. Our thinking part has decreased. And then, most importantly, it shrinks the hippocampus, so that part of your brain that determines past from present has now shrunk, and we have a really hard time determining what is past and what is present. So that means our past intrusive thoughts about that trauma keep coming back. It activates our system like it's happening all over again. Now, when you go into brain scans, like the fancy fancy brain scans that Dr. Amen does, you can see the parts of the brain that light up when specific stimuli are presented. And what happens in these PTSD patients is that the brain goes dark in the areas that it needs to be working, and it lights up big time in the place that it really shouldn't be lit up. And it's what really keeps us stuck. If we cannot process our memories, our trauma memories into long-term memories, if they're stuck as a present memory, we will never, never get past this response that we have, whether it's lashing out at people or it's completely disassociating.
Right. Absolutely. And like that's one of the disassociation is a huge factor in trauma because there is and this is, I can speak to this personally, is that whenever you experience trauma, especially trauma as a child, you have an imagination, and so therefore you have the ability to disassociate, and you can either turn a situation into something that it wasn't, or you can completely forget the situation happened at all. And that's where I had resurfacing memories coming up, a lot through my healing process that I wasn't expecting because I didn't recognize that they were even there. So disassociation is one of, to me, the most signifying factors of trauma. Like I mean, I can pretty much disassociate anything anytime I choose at this point now. I've gotten so good at it, and it's a trauma response, and I recognize that it's a trauma response, but it's still, like that's the biggest thing, is like you have got to re-assimilate all of those traumas into your body.
Yes,
And
and
when we're
now let me also add here that just because portions of your brain may have shrunk because you do have PTSD, I do have PTSD. So PTSD is technically brain damage. Your brain has damage to it, but it can't be, it's not that it's permanent. It can become permanent. There are people that never heal from their traumas, but there is a very good percentage of people that can heal from their traumas. And all it really requires is going back and making meaning of the trauma. Now, I'm in a group therapy that is for post traumatic growth. Post traumatic growth, in fact, I just read a book on post traumatic growth. But post traumatic growth is available to anybody who has experienced a trauma. If you come out of, say, you experienced a really bad car accident, and you come out of that and you're able to drive and get back into a car again, then you are actually working through those issues. You are working through that trauma. You realize that even though you were in a car wreck this one time, it doesn't mean that every car on the road is out to hit you. And that's kind of PTSD will make you think that every car out there is going to hit you. You can have trauma and have post traumatic growth at the same time. I could be triggered by this thing over here, but I also realize that I'm a stronger person because I survived that thing over there. And that's what you got to do, is find a way to look at it, dig into it, dig out the emotions, figure out what it is that's causing you to feel that way. Reframe your thinking so that you're telling yourself the true aspects of it, not the truth thoughts that your mind thinks up, because our thoughts aren't exactly truth.
right.
You have to find the facts in it. And then you will get to start to move past that. Most people need to develop their emotional intelligence to dig into it, though, because emotional intelligence is realizing why you fly off the handle and you're angry at the guy who beat their horn behind you, even though all he did was beep a horn. I mean, what does that even mean? Who
May not have
cares?
even have been at you.
Yeah, you don't even know. He could have been beeping on the side of the road because he saw somebody he knew, but you don't know that exactly. You don't know the truth as to why that person has beeped. You may take it immediately as a personal offense. How dare they? Well, that's an emotional response. That's an emotional response coming from somewhere. Why is it coming out? That's where emotional intelligence comes in.
Right. So I wanted to make a point to what you were saying about healing. The you're just like, some people have never. You have to want to.
Hmm.
You cannot. All of the psychiatrists, all of the therapists, all of the spiritual healers, all of them, not a single one of them will tell you, I am going to heal you. They will not never say that, because they know intrinsically from the core of you that it has to be your decision. You have to want to get better. You have to have a moment where you say, enough is enough. I have to stop this. I have to do something to make myself better. It has to come from you. It cannot come from anywhere else. You are solely responsible for your own triggers, for your own healing. And you cannot blame anyone else, because they are simply a catalyst to show you that which you need healing in. It's not because they're doing something to offend you or upset you or trigger you, that it's they are showing you, look, this upsets you. Why? It's a moment for you to be able to look within and go, why does this upset me so much? Why does this trigger me? It's because it leads back to a trauma that I have experienced that I need to bring to the forefront, and I need to express it, and I need to heal from it. But you have to want to do that for yourself. Nobody can make you do it. All of the begging for you to heal your mother or heal your spouse or any of, until they are ready, it's not going to happen. It's just not.
Willingness. What you're describing is willingness. You have to be willing to get well. Now, let me share a very personal story here. When I was in my very early 20s, I went, no, I'll say I was still in my late teens. I was probably 19. I was in the military at the time. And I have always felt inherently evil or possessed, or there's something wrong with me. And I had been searching for something to heal me for a long time. So I went to the Catholic Church, which is kind of what I was raised in as a kid. Well, I was raised in two churches as a kid. So I went back to the Catholic Church while I was in the military. And I went to confession and I talked to the priest and I asked him to forgive me for all of the bad things that I had done. Unfortunately, the bad things that I had perceived I had done were done unto me. They weren't things that I did. I needed to heal from those things, but I didn't need forgiveness for those things. So that priest looked me right in the eye and said, "My child, I cannot forgive you of these sins because they are not yours." And for a long time, I was angry. How dare him? How dare him tell me those sins aren't mine? Those sins weren't mine. The sins that I was talking about were the fact that I was abused as a kid. But being abused as a kid wasn't something that I intentionally went out to have happen to me. They happened to me as a just an event that happened to me. So in order to heal from that, I had to actually go back and dig into that event, feel my emotions, make sense of them, and find my way to the path of healing, which, let me tell you, from the age of 19 to the age of, I think, 38, I was unwilling to even look at. I still believed it was something that was broken within me. And it took 12 years of therapy to really, really get to the core of the reasons why I thinked, I thought the way that I thought, why I had cognitive distortions, where those cognitive distortions came from. And they really did all come from my childhood and how I perceived things to work and how I ended up making them work, which meant I disassociated a lot. I disassociated from anything that threatened my well-being or my safety. I never felt safe as a kid, even as a young adult. Even as an older adult, I had a really hard time with my safety issues because of my trust issues. And that had to go back to I lost trust in myself. I lost faith in myself. I lost love for myself. And that is what in turn needed to be healed first before I could even think again about how broken I was. Because once I healed those, I realized I wasn't broken at all. I was responding very normal for the circumstances that I had been presented with throughout my life. And then it was just a matter of being willing to make some changes and to go in a little deeper and pull out the kernel of truth of my trauma and heal from it myself without looking to somebody else to heal me.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes me kind of think of like, my past and, discovering over the last few years who I truly am and recognizing the people in my family and some of the people that I have surrounded myself with even have, their own perception of me. And I've come to realize that, you know what, these people really don't know me at all. Not even a little bit. All of the things that they say that I've done or that I've or how I, they've told me how I've felt and all of these different things. And I'm like looking back on it and going, that's all your distorted perception because that's not actually who I am. It's been a long journey of healing from being told you're not good enough,
Mhm.
that you'll never do anything right,
Ugh,
just
sounds awful.
constantly. But, and that brings me to um respect. You should not, okay, you're responsible for your own triggers and your own everything, you know what, and all that. But on the other front, you should also be respectful of other people and their traumas and understanding that they have a different perception from you and you don't know what has distorted their lens. Therefore, you shouldn't just, if somebody's triggered, it's like you respect that, like respect, I'm sorry, I did not know that that was an issue for you. And at the same time, and then if somebody says, I'm sorry, I didn't know that was an issue for you, then like, don't just keep hammering at them. Like you triggered me, you know, it's just
It's
having respect for
it's
each other.
exactly right. It is a respect. If you don't respect yourself, it is going to be very hard for anybody else to respect you because by respecting yourself, you teach people how to respect you. By loving yourself, you teach people how to love you. And that is very, very important because you could be creating your own misery by having that lack of self respect. And then others are treating you this way, and you keep asking yourself, why do people keep treating me this way? We have to really turn inward to find those answers, especially if we come from a place of trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's talk about working on trauma.
Mhm, mhm,
For me, the most in spirituality, the most important trauma work is shadow work.
mhm.
And that's what it's called. It could be, it's called different things: trauma work, shadow work, therapy, counseling. It's all about finding your wholeness. In spirituality, we talk about shadow work, and it's a shamanistic practice to retrieve your soul, to make yourself whole. They shaman and shamanistic belief. Um, every time you experience trauma, especially as a child, your soul fragments and you lose a piece of it. And by doing shadow work, what you are doing is you are integrating all of those soul fractals back into yourself to bring yourself back into wholeness. And so the way you do that is you start with inner child work. When you're experiencing trauma and you come across, an issue and that is to be healed, it is to go within and parent that child the way you wished you would have been parented, to hold your inner child and tell them, it's okay. I'm here now. I have your back. I won't let anything like that happen to you again. And, and it's, you expand upon that, you build upon that. And every time that you come across, this is something that happened to me in childhood, that this is why I experience the world the way I am experiencing it. You just hold yourself. I mean, like, you can even just do the practice of just giving yourself the biggest hug, and feeling, if you have children or if you have a parent or if you have an animal, what loving them feels like, right? You just turn that back on for yourself, give yourself a big, huge hug and say, I am not going to let you, I am not powerless. I will not let this happen to you again. I will hold you through this experience.
Let me just throw in another very personal experience that I have had. And it really comes from kind of a place of healing. Um, just what you said, that child within. You've got to love your child within. You've got to reconnect to that child within so that you can actually put those memories to bed in the past. So, what I want to say is that I had a Reiki session. And during my Reiki session, one of the most important pieces of it was having that abuser, the first abuser, come forward in my mind, of course, not in real life, just come forward to me while I was in the process of this whole cleansing with Reiki. And what we did was we had me imagine him come forward, but then imagine him as a child. Then imagine what traumas that child endured. And then kind of realize that that is just a damaged little child that hurt me as a child. And being able to take it down to, you don't get angry at children when they have done something wrong. You want to love them, make them feel better, and move forward. Well, that was an important piece of my healing, was being able to forgive what happened to me. And that is being able to forgive that person that I've never seen as a child that has been hurt themselves, but more of this daunting overall monster that has been in my life, when that's not all the case of it. Now, it made it easier for me to be able to forgive and move myself forward. Now, that forgiveness doesn't mean that I forget what happened to me, because that is impossible. That is impossible. That is a life experience that I cannot let go of. We can't just forget and pick and choose what memories that we remember. That is always going to be a part of me. That's always going to be a hurt in my past. However, by forgiving the person that did it to me will help me move beyond it. That'll help me work with the issues that I'm left with, not so much be so angry at why it happened to me in the first place. I know I'm never going to get the explanation of why that is going to satisfy me, that is going to make me feel all better. There's no apology that can come that will make me feel any better about it. There's nothing that can be said by that individual that is going to heal me. I have to heal myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you're making an extremely good point again, too, with forgiveness. Forgiveness in and of itself is not for the other person.
Nope.
Giving forgiveness to someone is for yourself, because giving forgiveness is one of the first steps into letting it go and putting it to bed. And until you can forgive someone, because you've got to realize that everyone is human and
Hmm.
everyone is operating from the lens that they carry, their perception. And, I mean, and everyone has a soul contract, there are, like, you come into this earth plane with a mission, and you have to have lessons, and some of those lessons are dark. And so you have to just recognize that that is a um it's a what am I looking the word I'm looking for? It's not, it's a human experience. We are here in a meat suit to have, and we are an energetic soul here to have a human experience. And that human experience comes with trials and tribulations and lessons for growth. And you have to recognize that everyone is just human and operating from a certain programming, like the Matrix,
Hmm.
essentially.
Yep. We are essentially programmed when we are young while we're mirroring our caregivers. Now, what if those caregivers weren't present? What if we had other people taking care of us? Well, we've just learned that the person that birthed us or the people that had us and made us a person aren't safe. We can't trust them to care for us because now we're trusting other people to care for us. Maybe we're finding that person that helps us the most. When I was a child, I can tell you, I was just, I was a very depressed and very lonely and suicidal child. So when that first teacher expressed interest, showed any amount of love, oh my God, I was in heaven. That was now my favorite teacher ever. And I'd rather be at school than at home. And that isn't a normal for every child. It I didn't realize that growing up. I thought everybody was trying to get away from home. I didn't realize that not everybody was having the experience I was. I
Right.
did notice in high school that other people's experiences were different than mine as I'd go stay with other people.
Oh, okay. So, like what you're saying about, the the teacher, finding a teacher that expressed interest. I did the same thing. And it was whenever okay, being empathetic, being in a situation where you didn't know what the attitude or the type of interaction you were going to have with your caregivers in any day. You didn't know if a pin was going to drop and you were going to get smacked or whatever. Um, I noticed that I clung to adults that I viewed as safe. I would like be under their coattails, be under their skirts. If there was an adult that expressed a type of safety to me, a type of safety where I was able to be a child and be able to express myself. I mean, like, I can remember adults, step grandparents or grandparents or teachers or my parents' friends or whatever, that would just think I was just absolutely the most adorable, child, the sweetest kid. And it was because I found them to be an anchor of safety, you know?
Safety is so important when it comes to this type of stuff. And then what you were just saying, there's also, remember the law of relativity. We're all going to experience hardships in life. It's part of the human experience, and it is a universal law. We are going to experience hardships. We can either rise above or fall below. And I really feel like as I find my spirituality, I feel like the whole point of life as a human is that you become a thing And then you learn to unbecome those things. And
Becoming
in
nobody.
unbecoming those things, you join the collective, you join the divine oneness, you develop that connection to something bigger. And that is, I think, or I feel like the biggest point of life is to really understand that all of us have troubles, all of us have tribulation in our life. That that person that was at the store that yelled at me because I moved my cart in front of them, they did that because they're coming from a hurt place in childhood. They haven't learned to unbecome that yet. It becomes very, very hard in turn to judge people for their behaviors when you realize that they're just a product of everything that they've experienced and they've become this thing that they don't understand because it is all this other stuff from life putting it on them. They're actually falling below and not rising above. And it's once you're able to gain that emotional control and ability to stand back and really decide whether you need to say something there. Maybe it's something frivolous and you don't need to say something. That goes back to the three gates, say it if it's kind, necessary, and true only.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And we just have so much, to do with learning our our place in the world and our place within, you know, um the universe, as a soul. We are here to have experience. We are here to experience hardship. We are here to experience, traumas. And the reason that we are here to experience those is so that we can appreciate the experience itself, to come back to, like you were saying, divine oneness, and to recognize that we are mirrors for each other, and that we have the capability of becoming just absolutely full of life and full of love if we are able to take hardships coming at us and not let it rock the boat, to just go with the flow, to be the willow tree, to
Mhm.
bend and sway in the wind, to be the stream that just keeps trucking along. It doesn't, it cuts its path. That is, where we're trying to go and what we're trying to achieve as souls. And and that, like, it's I understand that it sucks that we have to go through trauma, but once, like you said earlier, once you have experienced it and once you have risen above it, you have more of an appreciation for life and for love and for the planet and for animals and for other human beings.
Right. You end up grateful. It can express gratitude. Uh, Never is trauma a good thing. However, because it's a law of the universe, we are all going to experience hardships. The thing is that we don't know what happy is until we've experienced the other side of happy. We have to be sad. We have to be angry. We have to be fearful. We won't know what true happiness is for ourselves until we can put it against those other emotions and go, oh, wow, I was really, really in a bad spot 2 years ago. And now I'm in a spot that I'm a lot better. And I can be grateful for the path that I've traveled because I learned something from it. Everything that happens to us that's bad teaches us what we do not like or do not want in our life. And when we have a hard time giving up those things that walk out of our life, then that's showing that there's something that we're not giving ourselves first and foremost, and that we need to take that inward look. And not everybody is ready to do that inward look at any given time. It took me time to get to a place where I was willing to dig back into those traumas. I have been feeling very, very slow and sluggish, no energy, not really realizing what the heck is going on with me for the past week or so. But as I was sitting in meditation today, it came to me clear as a bell. This is an anniversary month for mainly my body. Um, and that in itself, that memory is stored in my body. I may not remember it up here because hello, PTSD, brain damage, but my body remembers it. And all I had to do was sit and let myself be in my body and experience the emotions that were happening. And once I sat in here and realized this is a body anniversary for me, this is why I'm feeling really, really sluggish and slow. I need to embrace that trauma that happened and find that meaning in it. Find what has made me stronger in that trauma. Every trauma that we can overcome, we can become stronger from. We can find gratitude after the fact if we really look at it. It doesn't mean by any means that trauma is a good thing and everybody should have it. Some people experience trauma way less than other people. Some of us are highly sensitive and therefore experience it completely different than other people. So it is all on perception for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the conversations that we've had, they're just telling a story. They all fit like in together, niche by niche by niche by niche.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, I I'm so glad that we had already decided to do trauma on our last episode because it seems like synchronicity has happened for me especially in my learning institutions that I'm partaking in. My mentor actually brought up trauma, and she had a point that I would like, to make too, and then that is that one of the steps in healing trauma is to tell your story. It doesn't have to be on a public stage. It can be to a therapist, it can be to a best friend, it can be to you, it can be to me. It doesn't matter who it's to. But part of it is of part of integrating the trauma is to speak it out loud. And to speak it out loud is to integrate and start the form of healing. And I mean, you've been, I know, in therapy and group and things like that, so I'm sure you have something to speak to that.
So what I will say here is never ever say, I'm sad, I'm angry, I am whatever the emotion is because of A, B, and C happening to me. By doing that, you are becoming that. You are telling yourself you are an angry person because this happened to me. And that's not exactly truth. You are actually just feeling a way about something that happened to you. And if you can remove it by saying, I am feeling angry instead of I am angry, you have then separated it from yourself. And now you can take an objective look and go, what is making me feel this way? And if you really dig into it, you'll be able to find where that root is and possibly pluck it out from the bottom, and it might not occur again. Maybe you won't get angry over that same thing. It takes time and it takes a lot of hard work. A lot of us are not equipped from childhood to understand and feel our emotions. Some of us don't have an emotional vocabulary. Some of us only know happy, sad, angry. Some of us don't know irritable or some of the other ones that are on the scale emotion chart. I have a couple of them around here where, you got your main emotions and then they branch out into all the other different things like rage or just simply I'm trying to think of something fast that's small. Uncomfortable. That's fast and small.
Right. Well, what you're saying too is like, doing any I am statement is your subconscious mind does not differentiate between what you say being truth or fiction. It does not differentiate between a joke, like I'm so stupid. It does the subconscious mind takes that as literal truth. So if you're saying I am happy, I am angry, I am sad, I am fearful, then you are speaking that into existence for yourself. It's called spelling for a reason.
That's absolutely right.
You are
Absolutely.
paying for that experience by buying into it. It's my big thing. Don't pay for an experience that you don't want to have.
My Tai Chi teacher says after every one of our sessions, never ever speak unkind things to yourself because you are listening. And that is exactly right. Your subconscious cannot take a joke. Your subconscious believes whatever you speak into the universe and sometimes think as gospel truth. And if you're saying, oh my God, I'm an idiot for tripping over that piece of wood. Well, you know what? Your brain is going to believe that you're an idiot. Your subconscious takes over and believes that as a core belief. And if you're thinking that, you're thinking of yourself negatively. If you're speaking it into existence. And guess what is going to come to you? It is that another law of the universe that, whatever you're vibrating out is going to vibrate right back at you.
Absolutely. That's the law of attraction.
Well,
For
there's
sure.
also there's also the law of vibration and the law of frequency too that have a lot to do with it as well.
They all work together.
Yes,
You don't have one without the other. I
absolutely.
think I think that a lot of people bottle a bunch of the laws of the universe into the law of attraction, but
Mhm.
they're separate things, but
They
they work together.
that they are.
People do not realize, or they are in denial that trauma begins at a very early age.
Mhm. A lot of people don't realize that when they were young and their pet mysteriously disappeared and went to the farm that you don't know where it's at was a trauma. That was a childhood trauma. When a child lose a loved pet, that's traumatic. And just because we're young, maybe we put that out of our mind and we don't necessarily remember that. The whole way that those situations are handled develops the way that we think earlier, develops our perspective on the world. The fact that, that happened, uh, who knows? It could have come from their parents. Maybe they had a pet and it died, and they didn't want to tell the kids that it died because it's too traumatic. So they tell them it went to a farm, but they won't tell them where that farm is, that you can't visit that pet anymore. It can become an issue that's deep seated and lies way within your memory. There are lots of things that I can think of that were like tiny traumatic things. I bet this one, I don't think my brother would mind me sharing this. That there was this one time, because I don't even think he remembers it. There's this one time there was a dry Christmas tree out by our burn barrel. We lived in Washington State. You could burn your garbage. The tree was taken out of the house. It was been sitting there forever. It's dry as heck. And my brother is a little bit of a firebug. So he had ended up going out there. It had gotten lit on fire and it went whoosh. Now my brother freaked out and ran into the house and went, "Oh my God, fire, fire, fire." And me, I walked out the back door, saw the blaze, and went, "Holy crap," and just went to the sink and got a pitcher of water because there was an empty pitcher at the side, filled it with water, went out there. By the time I went out there, it had already gone back down. There wasn't much dry around it, but I went and threw the water on it. That in itself was a mildly traumatic event that, I don't think of those tiny little things that happened, but they really did all happen. And I have to give, some of those things some credit in my life for making me feel certain ways about certain things. The fact that I'm afraid to burn a fire with 10-mile-an-hour winds at all because I feel a breeze and I'm like, "Ooh, that might be too strong. It'll blow the fire somewhere and then everything will catch fire." I have a little fear of fire, even though I am a fire sign.
I'm the one that's always called upon to start the fires because I can do it so well. It's so funny. But you're talking about pets, though. I was like sitting there thinking about my grandpa's house. My grandpa lived and grandma lived across the street from my grandma's sister and her husband in a neighborhood in Moore, Oklahoma. And my grandpa had and these lots were huge. This is whenever they had big lots, not tiny little lots. It was a tiny little house on a big lot. And he had a big barn in the back. And he had a feral cat that always had kittens. And I would constantly be taming kittens and bringing them in the house. And you know what? They weren't there when I came back from my mom or for my dad's. They were always gone. And I'm like, where's my cat?
Oh God. It's terrible. uh the point is though, is that trauma is kind of inescapable. At some point, we are all going to lose somebody that we love. Nothing in life is really permanent except for your relationship with yourself. And so that has to be the focus and the most important thing to yourself, because that in turn will shape the life around you to what you want it to be and not a culmination of things that you don't want, but you don't know how to get away from.
The main thing that I have to take away from everything is just to walk with kindness, to
Hmm.
not, you know, to not hold judgment. And that's part of the healing experience. That's part of the healing journey is that once you get to a certain place, especially spiritually, you recognize that to judge someone is to judge yourself.
Hmm. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Now, just because you have PTSD or trauma that has happened to you that needs dealt with, it doesn't mean that there is something wrong with you. It is natural to have feelings after a traumatic event because those feelings are what determine in your life where good is and where not so good is. That judgment that we have, we're human. That's part of our flaw. That's the beauty of being human, is that sometimes we judge things. And mindfulness, if you practice any type of mindfulness skills, there are a lot of different little pieces that work into mindfulness. You have your outward mindfulness, being mindful of things going around you in your environment. You have the inward mindfulness, what's going on with you emotionally, your well being, how you're feeling, where pain is in your body, that type of mindfulness. And part of being mindful is not judging any of the things that you experience, not judging the fact that the cat has popped holes in all of my furniture. I have furniture and I'm grateful for the furniture. I'm grateful for my cat for other reasons. Not the fact that she pops holes in stuff, but that's part of her nature as being a cat. So it's really being able to not judge the world around you. So practice mindfulness And also really work on your emotional intelligence. If you're practicing mindfulness, you're practicing emotional intelligence because you're taking your emotions and kind of setting them aside and being very non-judgmental about what is going on around you. When we label thing as good or bad, we are judging them. If we're saying, have a good morning, we're judging the morning already.
Yeah. I mean, it's to learn mindfulness is to help you become less reactive. Because if you are being mindful, you are not having an instant reaction. And you don't do things like lash out
Yep.
or shut down
When you're
or what.
mindful, you're calming down that amygdala that might be overactive. If your amygdala is overactive, you will know because you are emotional and you lash out at people and you have to tell them you're sorry afterwards because you realize, oh, I shouldn't have done that. That means you just need to practice some emotional intelligence. And what helps you get there are those activities like mindfulness, like yoga, like Tai Chi, like all of those things that bring you into your body to have your body experience. They teach you to take away the rest of it, to more go with the flow. Like you said, the willow tree or the river, go with it. Because if you're trying to fight against the river, you're putting in so much effort and energy. It costs a lot less energy to go with the flow.
Absolutely. It's so important too, because to not be in a state of flow is to be in a state of resistance. And if
Mhm.
you're in a state of resistance, that means that everything is hitting you. You're standing out in the rain without an umbrella. Or, you are, instead of catching the foul ball, you get popped in the head with it.
That's so true though. Like I can think of so many instances where I had the negative mindset myself. I had just this negative view of myself. And then I'd wonder why all these people in my life were making me feel extra negative. Well, it's because they're feeding that. I'm feeding into it. And now that's what I am. And it makes you feel heavy. It makes you feel lonely. It makes you feel useless. And those aren't the feelings that we want to have. We must realize that we're all going to experience trauma and that we can all heal from it as well.
Right. And also, like, whenever you're experiencing the resistance, it's it's a message,
Hmm.
like the universe is cyclical. It gives you signs and synchronicities. It tries to talk to you every single day through songs, through things you see on the internet, through things that people say to you. And it's cyclical, meaning like you're never going to miss it, because it just gets louder. It just keeps going, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you listen. And that's how it's how it is designed, so that you are kind of forced to move forward. You have to implement change, because eventually you're going to say, I can't stand to feel this way anymore.
Hmm.
It's usually what kicks people in the rear to actually go into therapy, or to seek a life coach, or to seek spirituality, is that this has got to stop. I can't stand feeling this way. It just keeps getting worse. Well, of course it keeps getting worse, because it's a literal sign from the universe telling you that you are not in synchronization, that you are not in flow, that you are in resistance. And as long as you are in resistance, it's going to freaking hurt.
When your expectations are set and something must be a certain way, we are going to set ourselves up for a disaster because we cannot expect everything to work out the way that we want them to work out. Life is life. Life is going to throw things at you. Life will throw the same people in different bodies at you over and over again until you get the message. And you know what? You'll get hurt heavier and heavier. You'll sustain more damage each time. And you'll feel, why is this happening to me? But there is an actual cycle. Maybe that'll be one of our future shows, is the actual cycle of change. Just remember, change is not a light switch.
Right. That's like, I have a good example for that. So you have a girlfriend that is, cannot stay in a relationship with a man because she cannot find the man that speaks to her soul, that treats her the way that she wants to be treated, loves her the way that she wants to be loved or deserves. And so therefore, it's relationship hopping, right? And but then she can't recognize that the reason that she's relationship hopping and can't keep a man in and is because she keeps running to the same kind of man over and over and over and over again. But she's got to realize that there's healing that needs to happen within herself before she's able to bring about the man that is good for her, that is what she needs, that's everything that she wants.
Or this person is addicted to the chemical reaction that happens when you fall in love. But once that initial, oh, I love you stage, he does everything I want, he's the best. Once that disappears and a real relationship needs to be built, then it's like, oh, this isn't what I want at all. Why is he being this way? Well, it's because the chemical reaction wore off. And now you need to find somebody new that creates that new feeling again. Oh, he's the best. He's wonderful. He does everything I want him to do. That's a chemical reaction.
Yeah. There's a lot to it, it's just like, but it's until you are able to recognize what it is within you that either needs to have that love chemical reaction or brings around the same kind of narcissistic abusive person, or the same
Yep.
person that's lazy and won't work while you do all of the work. There's various other, there's thousands of
There's
scenarios,
thousands of
but
scenarios and situations that would apply.
yes, absolutely. But it's until you recognize that change has to happen within you first, that you have to be the catalyst to begin, that you can't make change. And change is one day at a time, one step at a time.
It's
Like
a
you said, it doesn't
practice.
happen. Yes, it is a practice. You have to stick with it. You have to stay with it because you have to show the universe that this is now who I am and this is now what I want. Because it's just reacting to you. It's just giving you create your own reality. It is just giving you what you are asking for over and
Yep.
over again. What you don't realize is that what you're asking for is not what you need.
And you know what? We don't know what we need until we take that look inward, which is scary. I'm not going to negate the fact that looking into your traumas, going back and taking that deep look and finding the meaning behind it, it's a hard thing to do, especially the harder the trauma gets. I can think of people that have passed away when I was really young where it didn't affect me. But yet later on in life, when somebody else close to me ish, closest, like in the family, had passed away, it made a big impact on me. And it just comes from life experience. The more life you've lived, probably the more chances that you've had traumatic experiences throughout. And we tend to, as human creatures, only look for the good. That's part of that unhealthy ego, that hedonistic, I must have pleasurable experiences all of the time. not just some of the time. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. We have to have both experiences to appreciate the experience of happiness. You have to have that deep, deep sadness. So they all work together.
Right. A friend of mine, and it's a very common statement, but a friend of mine just said it to me a couple of days ago, actually. It's not the years, it's the mileage. Meaning that there's far more mileage than the years would implicate.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. All
Lots of
right.
mileage, lots of experience, lots of experience, and that's me. I am my and what makes me happy is to have experience. I have experiences. I love to travel. I love to, hang out with friends. I like to go do new things. I like to see new things. It's all about experiencing and doing it now that I have found spirituality. My experiences are just profound because I see so much beauty and so much love in the world. And I just, it's, experience.
Yep.
Very
And
powerful.
to be able to experience that in itself, to feel connected, to feel that connection between your fellow humans is profound. It's one of actually the elements of post-traumatic growth is deeper appreciation for the relationships that you do have in your life. You may not have a lot of them after growing, but you have more meaning in the ones that you have. It never necessarily means that you get more friends in the end. It is that you have maybe a smaller amount of friends, but those friends are extremely close to you and you trust them because you've learned that the people that are untrustworthy, the people that make you feel bad about yourself, are the people that are keeping you stuck. Having those people around you bring that out in you. And when it brings out those feelings, like suddenly you're like, man, I just talked to this person and they made me angry. I don't know why they made me angry. They were just talking about their own life. But if what they're voicing to you is purely negative and not a whole lot of positive, then that's what you're inviting in. And you don't want to invite those things in. I like
No.
to just simply say, or I usually just gloss over anything that's negative because I try not to give it a response. If I hear it, I'm like, I hear it out of my kids' mouths. And, you I've got to be there for my children. So I'm going to listen to what they have to say, but I'm also going to encourage them to think more positive. Like, man, that really sucks that you feel that way. Have you thought about looking at it like this instead so it doesn't feel so bad? And usually they'll, oh, I never thought of it that way. And they might switch their view a little. And I pride myself in being that little seed planter. It's not my job to heal everybody.
Right.
But if I could plant a seed of kindness in anybody's negative mind, I will.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the signs, and it's probably one of the biggest signs of a spiritual awakening, is having relationships that you thought you would have forever fall away
Oh,
because
yes.
you recognize that those relationships are not for your highest good. And I mean, like, I've had friendships that I've had for 20 plus years that I'm just like, I can't tolerate these people anymore until they are on the same growth pattern that I am. I can't, I can't handle it anymore. I can't handle the mundane, gossipy small talk.
So, where do we go? Have we covered everything on trauma?
I think, like, do I think we've covered everything on trauma? No. It's
Absolutely not.
impossible to cover everything on trauma ever, but it
I
would
th-
be especially impossible to even grasp the entire scope of trauma in one podcast.
right. And really, this podcast was just to kind of discover what trauma is, what it means, what trauma with PTSD actually is, because we've kind of separated those two. We've introduced a whole lot of global things that can absolutely be trauma. And I think the biggest one that you brought up, well, besides the coronavirus, is the war in Ukraine. And that's going to leave a massive impact. Like, I've been reading a lot of books, and a lot of these books go through Vietnam veterans, Holocaust survivors, a lot of people that have survived a lot of horrific events. And the war in Ukraine is going to produce a lot of trauma out of that region. But that region is already in a collective trauma where there was once control there. They had broken away from control, and now they're trying to be controlled again.
Well, and then like even Russia itself, even the citizens of Russia are going to be experiencing a collective trauma
Hmm.
because whenever the truth comes about for them, they are going to realize that what they think is right and what they think is just is far from it. And that's going to be a huge trauma for
It is.
them.
It is. And we see it in the Vietnam veterans. They will come back, and maybe their whole platoon was lost, and they are the survivor. There's a lot of survivor's guilt if it's a veteran that had to shoot somebody under orders. Or I even read about a gentleman who was to torture the captives. And when he came back, he hated himself for the things that he was ordered to do. And he really had to work through and unwind that trauma and find the truth in it. And then figure out where to go, where his strengths came from that in order to move by it. And
Yeah.
a lot of people survive horrific things and come out to do great things with their lives. They're the people that are writing the books that I read on trauma. There are a lot of people that can do so much good just by digging into their trauma, making meaning of it, and then being able to share their experiences so other people don't feel so alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another one that we didn't talk about was the military itself is traumatic. Just
Oh,
being in the military period is traumatic.
well, being in the military, you have a set of rules and guidelines that you must follow at all times. There's a chain of command, there's a way of doing things. And once you're a part of that club, you are basically indoctrinated, kind of in a sense brainwashed to be this person that handles adversity, shoves out all emotion to get the job done. And that in itself is the trauma. Because in order to be human and to get by those traumatic things that happen while you're in service, you have to process the emotion. But you have essentially been ordered to stuff that emotion down and get the mission done. And that damages a whole lot of people in the process. It's a necessary evil because I know why it's that way. It is that way because that's the way the military runs the smoothest. You can't have people breaking down under stressful situations when they are supposed to be fixing the stressful situation. So, and war is never pretty. So, that in itself is a huge trauma. A lot of us come out of the military trying to continue to be that strong person, trying to be that person that does not give into the emotions. Unfortunately, that's what leads us into PTSD because we don't know how to process them. Chances are our parents didn't teach us to process our emotions correctly. My parents didn't teach me to process my emotions correctly. I learned to stuff them in early childhood, and I continued that process. The military affirmed that rule, shove it under the rug, hide it out of sight, do your job. And it wasn't until I got later in life that literally it was taking smaller and smaller traumatic events to derail my life completely.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that people realize how much of an effect just the military itself has had on society because of that, you don't have the opportunity to express yourself or have, moments of trauma, and you have to stuff it in that box. And then as a society, we have started we lean that way. And that,
Mhm.
I think that, a lot of that has to do with the effect that the military has had, because not only, you know, like World War II, there were so many Americans in service, right? They all had that. And then they come out of that, and then they have that military standpoint at their home.
Mhm.
Like, you don't show emotion, you bottle it up, you put it in a basket, you put it in a box, you stuff it in the basement, and you leave it be. And
Sounds like my
that's
ex-husband.
but that's
Who
I
was
mean, but
military, by the way.
yeah, as a society, that's what we are conditioned to do, and that is far, far from what we need to do. We need
And I
to
think
express ourselves.
and there's another portion of that. A lot of us go through life believing that multitasking makes us incredible human beings. The ability to multitask is huge on a resume. However, multitasking splits your brain, period. You have a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit here, and you're working all these tasks. Well, when you do that, you can't really do any one task to 100%. You can get very close and it's good and it works. However, it only works until it doesn't work because eventually we end up multitasking ourselves to death. We end up getting burnout. There's a lot of burnout in the world right now and a lot of different occupations. Well, those are all coming from trauma responses. Trauma responses to make you split yourself and work across the board instead of doing one task to the best of your ability and then moving to the next task.
This is why I make lists.
Mhm.
I mean, like, I suffer from ADHD, and that is like, hopping from one thing to the next all
Mhm.
the time.
Mhm.
Like, there's, it's funny to us and a lot of people, like, we'll go into the living room and, oh, I've got to pick this up. But when I'm picking this up, I've got to take this in the laundry room. Oh, I've got laundry to do.
Right.
Oh, and now I've got to put this, something got left on the dryer that needs to be in the kitchen. Oh, now I've got to clean out the refrigerator. Oh, this needs to go in here. Now, oh, look, I've got to clean up this part in my bedroom. Oh, my bathroom's dirty, blah, blah, blah. And so that you've just
The never ending.
never ending. And so my
Mhm.
brain is fractured.
All
Explains a
right.
lot.
Well, and I do believe there are a lot of things that come about because we've experienced trauma, and I think that ADD is another one of those things that kinda comes from fractalization when you're young. When you're young and a piece of you broke off because of something so traumatic, until you can get that fragment back and make it whole with yourself, it's never gonna feel good. And I I have affirmations that I say every morning when I get up. I get up, I go to my altar, and I tell myself that I am love, I am whole, I am worthy, and now I am protected as well. Because those are the things that I desire the most. That's what I want to feel the most. And so if I actively tell myself that every day, it's part of that practice that gets me closer to actually achieving it.
And that's affirming to your subconscious too.
Mhm.
And like, instead of saying, I am angry, I am sad, I am unhappy, you are saying, I am light, I am love, I am
Mm.
whole, I am complete, I am powerful. You know, give yourself positive affirmations. It's a very, very important tool to restructurizing the way you think about yourself.
Yep, it's all about reframing. Reframe what you know. And some of it we have to go deep to reframe. Um, I have felt like a victim the majority of my life. So, this last part of my life, I don't want to be a victim anymore. I insist on not even surviving anymore. Now I want to thrive. That's where we should all be headed to, is a place where ourselves, our individual self, is thriving instead of just surviving, just trying to make it, or worse, thinking you're the victim in every situation.
Yeah. Victim mentality is
So dangerous.
outdated. Yeah, and outdated. And
Mhm.
it's the more you say, why is this being done to me? Why is this happening to me? You're giving your power away
Mhm.
instead of
And
standing strong in it.
And you're not getting to problem solving because that is where you wanna get to. You don't wanna be in the why?" Because that leaves you stuck. That leaves you feeling the same feelings over again. What you need to get to is the, "Well, this is how I am feeling. Let's figure out the deeper seated issue." There's usually something deep seated and buried within yourself that you don't maybe you don't necessarily remember, or you have a vague memory of, that you have glossed over because you know what? Everybody wants to hear they had a good childhood. Everybody wants to paint their parents in a very good light. Well, you know what? All of our parents were human too. And we will judge them less as parents if we view them as human. They were all children once that probably had some trauma of their own that we know nothing about, because unless it is voiced, unless they're willing to talk about it, you're not going to know.
Hmm. My mom is, really, is having a beautiful journey, I think. But whenever she first started on it with me, oh, I don't have it. I've already gone through all that. I don't have anything left to heal. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, it's good. And now she's starting to like come to realizations that some of the things that she does and the reasons that she does them is because of trauma that she suffered.
Hmm.
And she's realizing that there was trauma from my dad. There was
Hmm.
trauma from her mother. There was trauma from her, family. And that it's just been an eye-opening experience for her, and she's just like, "I thought I was fine."
Yeah, and I can say that, there's been people in my life that have said that. They have put that out, that they had dealt with the trauma and they're okay. They have worked through it all and there's nothing left to work through. That's not the way that trauma works. I, in my healing discovery, or my healing journey, I have discovered that I get new triggers all the time. Just because I fixed the trigger that made me feel angry doesn't mean I'm never going to get angry again. It just means that every time I get angry, I have to pay attention to what my emotions are telling me. Our emotions are there to give us vital information as to what is going on. If we're angry, then we're feeling something and we need to figure out where it is coming from. And then how to move past it, how to remove that anger from yourself and to bring yourself back to that peaceful, happy place. Sometimes it takes cutting out a person that's toxic in your life. Sometimes it takes cutting out maybe a bad habit you have, like drinking, to numb the pain. Maybe you don't realize that you're drinking to avoid paying attention to your feelings. A lot of people do it. I know I did in my past.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about discovery and mindfulness and perception. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a lot to.
And those distorted ego, the distortions that happen when you're building your ego as a kid.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Yeah, there's a lot to it. And recognition is the first step to understand that you there are reasons why you have the behavior that you do. and it's just, it's mind blowing. I mean, honestly, like you just, you know.
Yeah. I have had many, many epiphanies over the years and working on my mental health with therapists and group therapies. And I have done so many therapies. The ones I would recommend for trauma are definitely CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and DBT, which is the dialectical behavioral therapy. And both of those have to do cognitive is figuring out why you do the things you do. The dialectic is kind of how you talk to yourself about the things that you do. So, figuring out those two aspects of yourself are very important. And it's actually all part of that shadow work you would be doing in spirituality with a spiritual counselor.
Hmm. Absolutely. And like, shadow work is, I see this question posed all the time. What is it? And it is literally going within to discover why you do the things that you do and how those things came about, and to literally take them. It's to go into the darkness. It's to go into the darkness and take the light
Yep,
by
it's
bringing light into the darkness. Yeah.
part of that yin and yang. You know,
Hmm.
you go into that dark half of yourself. Yin and yang, we all have a yin and yang within ourselves. And it's up to us to dive into that darkness to grab out that light point. Because even the dark has a point of light. The light has a point of dark. And we have
Right.
to have those together and cohesively working together in order to feel whole.
And a lot of people have a standoffish behavior towards, shadow work or darkness in and of itself. And one of the most important things I think that anyone has ever told me, spiritual leaders or whoever, about darkness, is that the first thing that we experienced coming into the earth plane was darkness. There was
In
no
the
light in
womb.
the womb. It's
Nope.
darkness. The divine feminine is actually representative of the dark and not the light, because the divine feminine is where we hold our trauma and where it gets put. And to go into that place, it's not a scary place. It is literally the birthplace of creation. So you are going back into creation to figure out what went wrong where, and you're creating a fix.
Hmm.
So, don't be scared of shadow work. Don't let those terms, fool you into thinking that it's a bad thing. It can be scary, absolutely.
Hmm.
But the thing is that until you move through the fear, there is no growth.
Right. And I was just going to add to that that I hear a lot of people will put it as, oh, I have these demons inside of me, this darkness. Well, and they want to get rid of them. I've got to fight off my demons. I've got to fight away my demons, whatever the case may be. Those demons aren't actually demons, they're actually pieces of you that have fragmented away. And it's a matter of making yourself whole, embracing the darkness, not pushing it away or killing it or disposing of it. You can't. It is part of you. You have to be able to embrace it. I always kind of joke and say, I walk with my demons now. Well, actually, I created my demon. His name is Demo when he stands in the other room. So I made what my darkness was tangible, and in turn was able to come to a place where I can accept that. That is a part of me. My trauma, that darkness, those demons are a part of me. They're the part of me that I've always been scared of going in and checking into because they were really scary. Well, once I was able to do that shadow work, once I was able to embrace that darkness, it's like putting all of those fragments back together and making yourself whole. And I've had to do it with many multiple fragments because there isn't just one trauma in my life, it's very complex. And being able to visualize myself bringing in that little child that was hurt very young and saying, I have you now. I am going to be the person that you need. You don't need to look for a mother or a father figure. I am now that figure, and I am going to love you wholly with the darkness. That says so much to me, myself, and my subconscious that I feel better. And it's hard to go deep in digging into those deep dark places because it hurts. It makes you connect to a hurt that you don't want to reconnect with. That hurt that you pushed so far away so that you didn't have to feel it, or maybe you disassociated from it completely. And there's something back there that you still have a fragment of memory that you can't remember. Once you dig into yourself and do that internal work, you can bring it to the surface, bring it whole, and then you're walking as one. And you're not the darkness. You are the light in the darkness.
Right. It's integration. It's,
Mhm.
soul retrieval, essentially.
Yes.
It makes me think of, and this is not going to be verbatim because I don't have it in front of me, but in the audiobook Becoming Nobody by Ram Dass, he says that he has a whole bunch of psychoses, bad psychoses, ones that are just, very prevalent. And through all of the gurus, all of the spiritual leaders, all of the psychiatrists, the therapists, the counselors, through every one of those and all of the things that he has experienced spiritually, not one of those psychoses has he lost. They have
Mm.
just gotten small. They've gotten so small that he barely recognizes them anymore, but they're still there because they are an experience that you had. It's about integrating that experience into you and letting go of it.
Exactly. Exactly. Nail on the head.
Yay. Go me.
All right. Well, I think that covers the basics of trauma.
Yeah,
We, of course, will discuss more on trauma because it really is a part of spirituality in itself, just like ego and perception. Um, and, there's, like we said before, there's no end to the well of delving into what trauma can do and what it can mean for any one person and individual, which is why we talk about this subject because there's never an end.
absolutely. There's never going to be an end. I mean, there's no, my perception ends somewhere. Yours does, but there's a perception for every person, and every person's perception is based on the trauma lens that they carry.
Yep.
So, it's a never-ending cycle. There will never be an end to what you can talk about when it comes to it. And
Right.
voicing it, you've got to voice it. It doesn't matter if it is that you just need to simply get a journal and write it out. If
Yes,
you know,
absolutely. If you're not comfortable voicing the things that have happened to you to another person or on a platform for even that matter, journaling is a great way to have it written down, to break it down into smaller chunks to help you see clearly the picture that is there. Because there's always a huge picture in front of us. However, due to trauma, our vision of that picture may only be a tiny little segment of the big picture of everything. There are many, many paths to get you to where you want to be in life, but you may only see two or three possibilities with a view of trauma hanging over your head. Once you can heal those perspectives, you start to see a bigger picture. When you start seeing the bigger picture is when you really become one with everything around you.
yeah,
When you start
absolutely.
unbecoming, unbecoming those things that you think are you have judged as bad. In a book that I just read, there are countless stories of people that have gone through horrific things, but come out feeling their life is better after the trauma than it ever was before. And some of them before the trauma were on cloud nine and had wonderful lives. And then suddenly they lost limbs, or they lost a loved one, or, there's so many different ways that you can lose things that affected them deeply. And then once they had gone through it, dissected the experience, found what had made them stronger, and then pursued a new dream, they found a new possibility for life that has taken them to a greater height. Not all of us are going to experience a trauma that magnitude. However, everybody is going to experience trauma at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the way the world turns.
Hmm.
It's just, you don't, like we said, are not able to experience genuine love, genuine happiness, genuine gratitude if you have not had the opposite experience.
Hmm.
100%.
Yep. All right. So that's what we have for trauma today. Of course, if you would like more information on any particular one thing that we talked about in this podcast, by all means, hit us up on our website. You can email us there. You will find us on www.towhichisle.com. Is that right?
Yeah.
You can find us on Facebook at To Which Isle. And of course, we'll be on YouTube as well. And Buzzsprout, which puts us on multiple platforms for podcasts.
Yes, absolutely. And we
Ask
have
us
our,
questions.
yeah, absolutely. There's a forum, there is a blog, and then on the About Us section, you can either email Charmaine or myself.
Yes. And I guess that is it. Anything else you want to add, Krystle?
No, what are we talking about next time?
I don't know.
I wrote down mindfulness or emotions.
You know what? Let's do emotional intelligence, because mindfulness does play into emotional intelligence.
There you go. All right, sounds good.
Okay. So next time, join us and we will be talking about emotional intelligence. And I think that's the one due for the 1st of the month.
Yeah.
What's next month? April 1st? Wait, March?
April
April.
1st.
Yeah, April 1st. So until then, friends, light and love as always. And we hope that you work through your traumas.
It's absolutely light and love beams. Goodbye.